Good morning, Tyler. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Arrow. What do you got going on in this picture right here?
That's a Native American coup stick. And what that is
Amazing.
people would, the different nations would come together and they would go up to their worst enemy and they would touch them on the shoulder to show courage and confidence. And I look at it as being, well, man, if you're going to get that close, let's build a relationship and be friends.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. Dude, I got to congratulate you on this because, a lot of people don't realize that podcasting started with authors. It wasn't the comedians. It wasn't the musicians. And I love the fact that you are pulling this book from your second season of that podcast. It shows the true connection and the roots of what this is all about.
Well, that is actually news to me. I know very little about the history of podcasting, so I'm sure you could tell me more than I would know about it. Which authors?
Well, it was just those that just wanted their voices to be heard. And I think that's what drew me to it back in 2012 was the fact that it was like, I have all of these things, but it's the voices in my head. How do I get them to somebody else?
Yeah, that makes sense. I have always thought of it as radio, sort of a return to old school radio.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And people are, bringing it into their personal lives because of that, because it's content. It gives you something other than the same 12 classic rock songs.
Yeah, and that's something that is really an issue for me. I get really used to a playlist. I can tell if I'm listening to a playlist and it's the same one every day. I can't do that for too long.
But look at what you're doing with Cocaine and Rhinestone. I grew up a huge George Jones and Tammy Wynette fan. In my family, they were royalty. And then you release this book. I don't want to give it to my mom and dad, but then again, I do.
You do want to give it to your mom and dad?
I do, because I want them to know that, that not everybody is perfect. Because they put them on that stool and they thought they were the greatest thing that ever happened.
Yes. So yes, a lot of the book is concerned with sort of getting into the specifics about how much of the story that was sold to fans was not actually true. Mm-hmm. But it's not as though I am simply delighting in tearing that down and just leaving it in shambles and walking away. My aim is to sort of remove the veil so that we can see what was actually going on and replace the myth with a truth that to my mind is equally fascinating and actually I would say even important if our aim is to truly understand the music of George and Tammy, their lives, how that fits into the larger story of American history and even world history. The book takes a much wider lens than is obvious from just looking at the cover, but once you get into it, it really opens up a whole world.
Well, you're putting me on a unique little path, because as I read the book and I digest the book, I'm going back and I'm listening to their music. I'm listening to the lyrics, and it's like they kind of go hand in hand, and you get a different point of direction and view of what it was really like.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean that's very intentional. Not so much on the part of George and Tammy as the part of their producer, mm-hmm. a guy named Billy Sherrill. He was sort of the Svengali or puppet master behind the scenes. He was working with a crew of professional songwriters in Nashville, and it's a small clique where they were all in this little club and, not a lot of outsiders were allowed in. And that enabled them to all work with the same strategy, sort of this playbook, which was if there's a big story that breaks about your artist, then we want to write a song that sounds like it could be this artist talking about this big story. When it's someone like George Jones, a lot of famous troubles with addiction and substance abuse, if there's a song that we could write that seems to be about that, then it comes across as more real, to the audience. Or with Tammy Wynette, once she becomes involved with George Jones, well, he's clearly getting in trouble over here. So what would she feel like about that? So let's do that kind of a song. And then what's interesting is when you're looking at the singles, the ones that they were really pushing to sort of set the narrative, you get one idea. But then if you start digging around in album credits and seeing, okay, well, here's a song that was never a single, but Tammy Wynette is the writer of it. What's that song about? When did she write that? And then you're like, oh, wow, this is probably how she was really feeling at this time, even though that didn't become a huge part of the story. So I guess that's sort of an example of what I mean when I say once you get below the surface level of what they're telling you to look at, once you start looking around at all this other stuff, there's just as much fascinating material in the true version of what was really going on.
Tyler, I call that hidden speak. As a daily writer, I believe hidden speak is where we really have our true emotions, and we don't want people to know what we're really thinking and how we're going to react. We put it in a different language, and other people get their own interpretation.
And Tammy spoke of that in interviews. She would say that when she was writing a song, she would pretend that this stuff was happening to someone else. And I think that she sort of did that in her own mind as sort of a trick to get out of her own way to write these songs, when really they were things that happened to her. She was just pretending that it had happened to someone else. It was sort of a way to short circuit past that am I talking about myself too much or worrying about those sorts of things? You just tell the story as if it happened to someone else.
Yeah. The song, She Thinks I Still Care, I still see that song as being social media before social media became cool.
I could see that. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, because, I mean, it really, I mean, I swear to God, every man sat up when they would sing this song. Because, I mean, it's almost like, God, he could be singing about my life or somebody that I know that's close to me.
Well, so that song is sort of the moment that George Jones became cemented in everyone's mind as, oh, this guy is clearly the best country singer on the planet right now. Like, no one else is even close. And if you listen to his vocal performance on that song, you will hear why. It's I could spend a lot of time talking about his singing on that song, and I have. But I think he could have been singing about anything if he sang it like that, and everyone would have sat up and paid attention. But the fact that he was singing about what he was singing about really brought a lot of people online and connected them to his soul, kind of. I think that he really bared a lot of himself in that performance, and it's still very powerful and moving today.
With his vocal stretching that he does in there, I mean, it always reminds me of John Lennon and how he was forced to kind of stretch his vocals as well. I've always wanted to know if George went in there on purpose and stretched things so that we could truly feel the inside of his soul.
So that song was recorded within a few years of him coming from Texas, which was a lot of not bad, but make do studios. It's not as if the sound quality was terrible. It just wasn't, the top of the line down in Texas. And then he goes up to Nashville, and we're talking state-of-the-art recording studios. He's working in studios that were built by a guy named Owen Bradley, who may have invented a lot of the things that we take for granted in modern recording studios to control sound waves and reflection and make everything sound good and that sort of stuff. So I think that once Jones came to Nashville is when he was really able to hear himself for the first time. So I think you're almost hearing a conversation he's having with himself, where he's hearing his voice and what it sounds like, and sort of, oh, well, what if I did this? And what if I did this? And can I push this even further than I thought? And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you sing, but if you're a singer, you can get comfortable, and all of a sudden it's almost like you're not even the one doing it anymore.
That's right.
You're sort of listening to it along with everyone else. And I think that's sort of what we're hearing there.
Let me tell you about being a musician. When you go back to those songs that you left behind 2 and 3 years ago, and you go, why did I, what's the story on this? And it's almost like you've dropped a piece of yourself off, and that breadcrumb is the one that continues your journey.
Yes, absolutely. And it's the same thing as a writer too. You can go back to something that you wrote a long time ago, and sometimes even you'll start reading it not realizing that it was something that you wrote. You're just like, wow, this is pretty good. Who did this? It's like, it was you.
Did they use Hee Haw as a promotional tool? In other words, when George was in trouble, get him on Hee Haw so people can start thinking positive things about the guy again. And because Tammy was on there a lot as well.
I've never heard anything like that with Hee Haw, but maybe it's certainly plausible. That is the way that those kind of things get talked about. With Jones, he suffered from stage fright really badly. So whenever there was a huge problem or something went really wrong, the tendency with him was to run away, to just get away from cameras and microphones and reporters and hide out, and hopefully everyone would just forget about him for a while, Yeah. Tammy, on the other hand, is much more likely, I would imagine, for what you just said to have taken place. Her approach seemed to be to try to do damage control, and do a bunch of interviews, which unfortunately had the tendency to achieve the opposite of its intended effect. It seemed like the more she talked, the more she got herself in trouble, because she would try to control the narrative and wind up saying things that were not true and were very easy for someone to just go verify what the truth actually was. And that eventually had a lot of negative effects on her career. A lot of her fans sort of felt lied to, because they were being lied to.
Yeah. Let's talk about that stage fright, because I have put a lot of time in studying the plan and the purpose of that, because even Carly Simon went through that. And the one thing that I'm learning is that stage fright is when you no longer believe in the character that you have become, and you want to change, but you don't, because everybody else still wants George Jones. Do you think that he just did not want to be George Jones?
That's a really great way to put that you just said. I may have said earlier, so I've done a lot of these interviews. My father had me on stage before I could read, so I've always been probably more comfortable with being on stage than most folks would be. But everything I know about stage fright, it does sound like what you just said is accurate, that it's so much of a fear of, I'm going to be found out. Everyone's going to know that I'm not supposed to be here. And yeah, I think with George Jones, it obviously wasn't a fear that he was going to go out there and be a bad singer. He was not an egotistical man, but he did know what he was capable of doing with his voice. I think that the issue with him is, once he became really famous, and a lot of the you start to realize that you're not in control of what people think about you, is essentially what happens when you get famous. And that's not to say that you're concerned that everyone's going to think negative things about you. With Jones, it seems like the concern was, all of these people think I'm a better person than I really am. All of these people think that because I can sing well, that I must be a great guy, and I'm not perfect, and that, again, like that is also a bit of I could see how that could sound like a bit of a ridiculous thing to worry about. I'm not perfect. Everyone's going to find out I'm not perfect. But when you've got thousands of people in front of you projecting some ideal version of who you're supposed to be, the fear of not living up to that quite literally is crippling. And as we've seen with so many entertainers, and certainly with George Jones.
I would love to know what he saw and how he spoke to himself in the mirror. Because even if he's under the influence, or if he's just George, dry George, I mean, he had to have had conversations with himself in that mirror.
Yeah, he did speak a little bit about this, because he was in a position of trying to understand himself and trying to understand his addictions and substance abuse just as much as anyone else. And in his day, we did not have the language that we have now. We did not have even the school of thought that we have now to understand these issues. But he did speak about, at one time, learning that adults who were victims of child abuse, as he was, his father was an abusive alcoholic, you tend to as a young child, the tendency is to assume that you deserve this. If a parent is behaving this way towards you, it must be your fault. You must have done something wrong, because parents know the way the world's supposed to work. And if you're being punished, it's because you've done something wrong. So it seems like Jones really internalized that idea. I'm broken. There's something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And even if he didn't know what that was, he was just taking his father's word for it, you know? So that would be a compounding problem when it comes to what we were just speaking about, getting on stage in front of thousands of people. But they're going to find out I'm broken. They're going to find out there's something wrong with me. They're going to find out there was a reason that my father abused me. And it just all sort of tumbles in on itself. And I don't know how long it took him to sort of figure all of this stuff out for himself. It does seem like he eventually did. Part of his story is that redemption storyline where in old age, it does seem like he was able to sort of put a lot of those demons to bed and just sort of settle into being a regular guy.
Wow. As a mobile DJ, I still play George Jones's music. And I think the reason why I do that is because I love to watch older people freak out in the way of, oh my God, he's playing George Jones. I mean, he still has an effect on people today.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the great things about his discography is the sheer span of it. Mm-hmm. You know, he started recording in the 1950s and kept going past the year 2000. So you really get sort of a 50-year plus chunk of the history of the genre just through him. And from the early stuff that is, I would call it like just straight up rock music, really, like White Lightning, songs like that.
That's it, yeah.
I mean, you could sneak that song into a playlist of 50s rock music, and no one's even going to realize they're listening to country music.
Dude, where's the place that people can go to get more information about you so they can see what you have done with music history and what you do with your podcast?
Just cocaineandrhinestones.com is a great one-stop shop. Find out about the podcast, find out about the book, all that good stuff.
Excellent. Please come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you, Tyler.
Incredible. Arrow, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Will you be brilliant today, okay?
Yes, sir. You too, please.